If you think Halloween is just candy and costumes, think again. Tonight, I'm sharing 4 terrifying true horror stories that will haunt you. Real encounters told in first person, all wrapped in October's orange light and the kind of silence that makes ordinary places feel wrong. Story 1. Alley Clowns. It was almost Halloween when we decided to play hide-and-seek behind our apartment building. I was 9, the kind of age where you think everything is a game and fear is something you can outrun if you're fast enough. My little sister Jess and my brother Mike were with me. We lived on the 2nd floor, and the building had a narrow service alley behind it, garbage cans, a flickering lamp, cracked brick walls with graffiti. At dusk, the alley went from ordinary to a strip of shadow that swallowed sound. The air smelled like damp paper and diesel from the street below. Leaves crunched underfoot. We figured the alley would be the perfect place to hide. "Ready or not, here I come," we called in giggles that felt too loud in the cold evening. We split up. Jess squeezed between stacked bins, Mike tucked behind a low wall, and I pressed myself flat against a dumpster, thinking I was the clever one. It was darker further in than I expected. The orange street lamp gave everything a thin, sickly glow. At first, it was just the usual city noises, a distant car, the clack of someone's heels on the sidewalk. Then the dog in the apartment across the way started barking, a low, insistent sound that made my heart tighten. The barking stopped as suddenly as it began. I imagined my mom downstairs calling us in. I remember thinking it would be funny if we scared her when she came up the stairs. Then I saw them. They were standing near the back gate, partially hidden by shadow. 2 figures, tall, still. They looked like clowns, but not the bright party clowns you see at birthday parties. Their costumes were tattered, the colors muted as if someone had washed them 100 times. One had green hair that hung in greasy strands. The other, the one that stuck in my memory, had its face blacked out, like someone had painted a mask over it and forgotten to draw a mouth. The lamp cast a flat, wide light, and their outlines were almost too ordinary, 2 people standing. It was only the small things that made the scene wrong, the way they didn't shift weight from one foot to the other, the way the green hair didn't move in the breeze, as though their bodies were holding stillingly to some purpose. I froze. Jess whined somewhere behind a bin. Mike made a sound like he'd swallowed a laugh, and it came out sharp. One of the clowns looked up, not up in the theatrical way clowns do when they want to be seen. It was a slow, measured tilt, like the head of someone listening to a radio.
Then the clown with the blacked-out face slid one hand up the brick wall, a slow, spreading motion, and pressed their palm to the 2nd-floor window just below where our living room was. The glass didn't shake. The palm lay flat as if it belonged there. I thought of our mom in the kitchen, maybe cleaning, maybe already aware that we'd gone out. I thought of running upstairs and telling her everything, like an adult could put the scene back together. Instead, I did nothing. My legs refused to obey. Time stretched thin, sound sharpened. I could hear the distant rumble of a garbage truck, a radio playing a commercial, a car door slam. Then the knock. Not a knock, really, but the pressure of a hand flattened to a window. It was the slow, soundless kind of movement that makes your bones go hollow. "She's looking," Jess whispered. "She's looking at us." One of them turned slowly toward the alley and saw us in the gloom. That was the worst part. The moment someone who shouldn't have noticed you notices. The clown with green hair pointed, not with a gesture so much as an intention. And for the first time I felt, sharply and with a cold clarity, how small we were. We ran. I didn't remember my feet moving at first, only the sudden surge of air as we tumbled, the scrape of my palms on gravel, Mike's breath rattling loud beside me. We didn't go upstairs. We ran around the building and straight to our mother's knees, dragging our scraped hands and sudden wet fear into the smell of her coat. She scooped us up without a second of hesitation, angry and confused, the short, fierce way a parent gets when something has frightened their kids. We chattered between sobs, told in fits that we had seen clowns and one had put a hand on our window. She looked out the kitchen window toward the alley, then down to the street. There was no trace of them, no footprints, no discarded costume bits, nothing except a smear on the glass where the light had caught what our eyes insisted was a hand. She pressed her thumb to that smudge and frowned, more anxious than she admitted. She called downstairs to the manager. We called my dad, who drove home early from work, his worries softening us like a blanket. The police came. They walked the alley with flashlights and polite questions. They said they'd seen kids joke around in costumes before, and maybe someone had been playing a trick. The manager remembered a report 2 weeks earlier of someone in a bad clown wig loitering near other buildings, but no one had ever filed anything formal. They wrote down our names, took the details, and the officer who spoke to us, a young man who smelled faintly of coffee, promised to increase patrols for the next few nights. That night, and for many nights after, I could not sleep if the lamp outside our window stayed on. The sound of wind against our curtains made me imagine fingers crawling across the panes.
I started placing a chair against the window and slept on the far side of my room like a sentinel who thought furniture might help. Months later, a neighbor said she'd seen people in clowns a different night, but by then the world had moved on, and nobody on the police log connected those sightings with our smear on the glass. We grew out of the hide-and-seek habit. Jess stopped wanting to play in places where light met shadow. Mike bragged about being brave, but he still jumped when someone tapped a window. I carried the image of that blacked-out face and the flat hand pressed to the glass, the way ordinary things can look like threats when light falls wrong. I never learned if they were pranksters, people in bad costumes, or something else. That's what keeps me awake when the autumn wind begins to whisper. The not knowing sits heavier than any explanation. If this story hit you the way it hit us, and you want more true encounters like this, hit like and subscribe. There are 3 more. When the light in a familiar place goes crooked, your whole past can feel like a different country. That small room of memory is the threshold where ordinary life and the uncanny meet. Keep that thought with you as we step into the next story. Story 2, The Decrepit House Chase. Middle school is a strange season where curiosity and bravado live in the same body. I was 12 when I first noticed the house across from my school. It had been empty for as long as I could remember. Parents said it was older than the other buildings on the block. Kids said it was haunted. The front yard was a tangle of dead grass and low skeletal shrubs. A sagging porch roof hung like a tired brow. The windows were thick with grime, blinds put tight like eyelids. It sat there day after day, like something that had been paused and left mid-breath. We told stories about it the way kids do. Someone claimed they'd seen eyes behind the glass. Someone else said their cousin's cousin had a friend who'd seen someone standing at the top of the stairs. It was the kind of place where dares were minted. Walk up and touch the mailbox, stick your hand through the slats of the fence, throw a rock and run. I never took those dares. It felt like a living thing that didn't like to be disturbed. One October afternoon, Zach and I were walking home after basketball practice. The air tasted metallic with the promise of cold rain. The school bell had emptied the street into groups and parents at crosswalks. Most kids turned toward the pizza joint and the video store. Zach and I cut across the block, the shortcut that passed the old house. We'd been joking about the upcoming Halloween dance, trading costume ideas. The sun was low, and the house's windows were dark as ink. As we reached the sidewalk opposite the house, something made me slow. A corner of a curtain shifted. Not the wind. It moved like a hand pulling back a veil. A figure, a human silhouette, stood at one of the upstairs windows. It was a partial figure, more suggestion than detail, but it was enough. It seemed to watch us like someone waiting for a bus, patient, deliberate, unhurried. My stomach turned into a stone. "Did you see that?" I asked, quietly so not to attract attention. Zach shrugged, but his voice had no real conviction. "Maybe it's the sun." It wasn't the sun. As we passed, the figure disappeared from the window. We crossed the street and continued walking, fastening our jackets. The hollow in my chest grew as if something had settled there. There was a rational voice in my head. Old houses are drafty, reflections happen, people are people. But the little hair at the back of my neck kept rising. A few blocks later, when we were about to turn, I heard steps behind us. Not the rush of many feet, not the shuffle of a crowd, but one careful, steady set of steps. Someone walking faster than a person who wants to be ignored. My pace quickened. I told myself to look back, but there was that childish rule in me, don't show fear. When I finally did glance over my shoulder, the street seemed empty. The streetlight cast long shadows. The house was a dark rectangle further down. But there, a figure at the sidewalk's edge moved with us. It was like being followed by a thought you couldn't pin down. My mind offered possible explanations. A neighbor, someone going the same way, a police officer. None fit the shape in my peripheral vision. The steps behind us accelerated, and I heard breathing, not loud, but close enough to be carrying the space between my ears. Zach and I broke into a run. Our sneakers skidded on damp leaves. The chase wasn't Hollywood fast. It was the low, high-stakes sprint of two kids trying not to be caught. We rounded the corner and dove behind a dumpster in an alley, pressing our backs to the cold metal. The stink of rotting food and rust filled my nose. My heart pounded like a fist against my ribs. We crouched so still I thought we might disappear. From the edge of that alley, I could see the house across the street through a gap in the fence. The street was empty. The house, too. No figures in windows. The quiet was a pressure. We stayed crouched for a long time, listening to distant traffic, the occasional thump of a passing truck. When we finally crawled out and peered over the dumpster, our clothes damp and our hands scraped, there was no sound behind us, no indication of pursuit. We walked home like thieves, mouths dry, minds reeling at how quickly the day had bent towards something else. My parents were furious at the grime on my jacket. They were more relieved than angry when I told them why I had run. My mother suggested calling the police, but what do you tell an officer? We were chased by a feeling. We did go back the next day, after school. A police car idled at the curb. 2 officers walked the perimeter of the property with flashlights.
They unlocked the side gate and went inside. After what felt like hours, the officers came back out, their expressions neutral. "It's empty," one of them said. "No one's living there, no recent sign of habitation." That didn't explain the footsteps. It didn't explain the way the figure had looked, as if it had been waiting for us. Rumors swelled in school. Some kids claimed the house had once been owned by a man who kept to himself, who had been seen at odd hours. Others said it had been condemned for structural issues. A blog for our town that collected local oddities later ran a short piece that labeled the house the Silent One, noting how the windows seemed to absorb the light in a peculiar way. The piece framed this as folklore, background texture for the neighborhood, not evidence. For weeks, I changed the route I took home. I walked in groups, pretended to be busy with calls I wasn't making, learned to keep my eyes down in the spaces where the uneven pavement gave me comfort. The chase left a residue, a suspicion that sometimes the world arranges itself to press you out of patterns you once took for granted. I've walked past abandoned houses since, and I still feel that tightness when the blinds don't move and the windows hold their breath. Whether the figure was a person hiding, a neighbor with an odd habit, or something more ambiguous, I don't know. What I remember is the way my breath shortened, the pressing close of someone else's presence, and how small decisions, which street to take, when to run, can shape 10 years of caution. Abandoned places make you aware of how exposed you are. They turn routine routes into possibilities. Keep that unease with you. It's the shape of the next story. Story 3. Kneeling Figure and the Stable Fire, Poland. This one takes me out of the city and back to a stretch of country that felt older than our parents. My family had moved to a rural area in Poland a few months when I was about 14. The nights there were wide and thinner, as if the world had stretched to accommodate sky. The village center had an old church, and beside it, a stone stable that had been out of use for as long as anyone could remember. A path ran from our house to the church, a narrow, uneven track lined with hawthorn bushes and the scent of hay. I walked Susie, our lanky shepherd mix, almost every evening. Susie was timid around strangers, but protective in subtle ways. Her ears would lock. She'd drag at the leash if there was something in the grass. One dusk, with the air tasting of smoked bread and apples, Susie refused to go forward. Her hair rose along her spine, and she emitted a low, steady whine. I paused, thinking she'd caught a rabbit scent. The thrill of dusk in a small town is the way animals remind you something is off. About 30 yards ahead, near the old stable, a person was kneeling. At first I thought it might be someone praying or a farmer inspecting something. The figure wore white robes.
It was a plain, simple white, not the kind of clothing anyone in the village commonly wore except maybe a priest at certain ceremonies. The person's head was bowed. Susie whined and tugged, refusing to step closer. My breath hitched. The light was thin. The shape might have been a tree stump, but it wasn't. I remembered the exact sound of the leaves that evening, the brittle whisper they make under slow wind. The figure did not turn when I approached. They were very still, a posture of concentration or desolation. I said hello, the small voice of someone trying to be polite to a stranger, but inwardly alert. No answer. I kept the leash short and crossed to the other side of the path, giving enough distance that I felt safe to keep walking. Susie stayed close to my side, leaving a trail of uneasy silence behind us. I told my family that night about the kneeling person in white. My dad assumed it was someone from the church doing some cleaning, or a villager with an odd habit. Why would someone be out kneeling near a disused stable? We all felt reassured enough to shrug it off. The next morning, local theory met headline. A stable that had sat empty for years caught fire during the night. The flames ate at the dry timbers with a hungry speed, and by dawn the building was a char of blackened beams. The news said no one had reported seeing anyone enter, though some neighbors recalled hearing a small, distant thump well before the blaze flared. That image of the kneeling figure sat like a stone in my memory. I kept replaying the scene, trying to reconcile the calm I had seen, the person in white, hands pressed to the ground, their head bowed as in prayer, with the violent, indiscriminate hunger of fire. It left a hollow question. Had that figure been a person trying to help, or had it been an omen of something else? The police found no trace of an accelerant that pointed definitively to arson. Investigation records, as reported in the small-town paper, used careful language. Cause under review, no suspects, structural compromise may have contributed. Locals whispered versions of both. Some people said it was foul play. Others said lightning or a faulty wiring in the old stable had done it. No one offered certainty. Susie never liked the path after that. Even months later, when the charred wood had been cleared away and a yellow new growth appeared in the soil, she would hesitate at the spot where we had seen the person kneeling. My family tried to treat it like an unfortunate accident. Things happen, my mother would say, and tried to settle us with warm soup and ordinary chores. But I noticed how our route changed. I learned a new caution. You don't walk the same way you once did when something like that sits in your memory. It changes where you let your guard down and where you don't. People in that village told me stories about white-clad figures in the night, ways the land held on to people's stories and returned them as riddles.
I passed those along as atmosphere, not proof. The fact remains, I saw someone kneeling in white. Susie reacted, and hours later the stable burned. What it meant, whether human or uncanny, remains a question that leaned into my thinking every time I passed a place that once felt safe. Animals notice things we miss. Leave that thread with you as we go to a place full of laughter and gourds, the pumpkin patch. Story 4. The gliding figure at the pumpkin patch. Autumn fairgrounds have a tendency to split the world neatly into things that are safe and things that feel slightly off. That year, the local pumpkin patch had turned into a small festival every weekend, a maze of hay bales, a stand selling hot cider, strings of lights twined between the trees. I was with Chi-Chi and Kevin, two friends who made me laugh nervous laughter even when I didn't mean to. We were there for the perfect pumpkin, the one we could use for carving. The air smelled of cinnamon and crushed leaf. Children ran with faces painted like foxes and tigers. A radio played old songs in a loop. We felt small and invincible at once. We wandered the back part of the patch, where the trees crowded and the ground was uneven, offering little pockets of dim. There was a small clearing where people left their carts and backpacks, and beyond that, a stand of trees where the festival lights thinned into shadow. We joked about the perfect jack-o'-lantern, elbowed each other, and kicked at the dry wheat stalks. The afternoon leaned toward evening, the sky dimmed in that October way, where the day seems to fold into itself. Chi-Chi spotted a hat on a low branch. Someone lost a witch's hat, she grinned. The hat was old and looked put there by accident, a dark felt with a slight crease. We laughed, imagining a child's role play, and kept moving. I told myself the moment was harmless, the kind of small strangeness you'd find at any community event. But then I saw movement among the trees beyond the clearing, something not stepping so much as passing through, smooth and uninterrupted, like a rug being drawn across the floor. The figure was tall and thin, wearing a long coat and a brimmed hat. The way it moved was wrong for walking. There were no clear footfalls. It seemed to glide just above the ground, and when it passed a pool of light, its shadow elongated without the typical gap between shoe and earth. The hat cast a shadow over an indistinct face. It did not dart or hurry like someone trying to avoid attention. It moved with a weird, calm economy, like water sliding along a riverbed. Chi-Chi nudged me and whispered, "Do you see that?" Her voice was almost thrilled and almost frightened all at once. We stepped closer, curiosity trumping caution. I remember the mulch shifting with our steps, the distant noise of a carousel playing. The figure paused. It turned its head in a smooth motion that was almost languid.
Even from 30 feet, I thought I could see it breathe, a soft movement under the coat that made me aware of the air. Then it continued, not walking, but sliding between the trunks, as though the wood yielded around it. I could feel my chest pressing inward, the telltale tightening that comes when your brain keeps thinking several possibilities at once and rejects them all. We ran. The flight from the patch felt comedic in daylight, but urgent in that failing light. We dropped our apple cider in our haste, laughter snapped into panting air, and for several long strides we kept glancing back to see if the figure followed. It did not. When we reached the festival, flushed and breathless, we tried to convince ourselves it was someone in a costume, a good performer playing up the eerie factor for the seasonal crowd. But our unease persisted. That evening, back home, I scrolled online and found an anonymous post in the local forum.
Weird sighting at the patch. Someone who seemed to glide among the trees, not walk. Anyone else see? The poster's tone was wary but curious, the kind of internet breadcrumb that suggests we're not alone in what we've seen. A couple of replies claimed to have noticed a hat in a tree. Others joked. No one had a clear picture. Sometimes people put unusual performance art into festivals to jar the crowd. Other times, local pranksters try to spook evening visitors. I can't deny either possibility here. What stuck with me was the movement, not a limp or a stride, but a quiet, floating translation across the plane of the ground. That motion made me imagine a presence that didn't follow our rules of movement. For days afterward, I imagined the trees as something that could, by its arrangement, allow weirdness to stitch across it, a not wholly natural current that could carry a figure without sound. We kept going to pumpkin patches each October after that, but I always stayed with a group and studied the way people moved among the trees. The memory of that slow, gliding silhouette slid into the small habits that define caution, where I park, how close I stand to friends and crowds, how I watch the margins of joyful places for things that appear to move against the grain. When ordinary places refuse to feel safe, you start to map the world differently. You notice how the slightest shift of a shadow can carry a weight of meaning you didn't know it possessed. You also notice how little evidence we often have beyond a shared shiver. Conclusion. 4 stories, 4 nights in October. Little hands pressed to glass, a shadow at a window, a kneeling figure by a stable, a silhouette that didn't quite touch the earth. Each of these moments comes with a stubborn absence of tidy answers. Police notes say under investigation or no signs of forced entry. Local blogs file a curious piece under folklore. Neighbors swap warnings that begin with a laugh and end with a look.
What keeps these memories alive is not proof, but the way they altered habit and attention. A child who once darted through an alley will linger in light. A teenager who took shortcuts will pick a different path. Those tiny reroutes accumulate into a life lived slightly more on edge. I'm not telling you what any of these encounters were. I can't. I'm only telling you what we saw, who was with us, how the air smelled, and how our bodies reacted, so you can meet the story where it is, at the place between explanation and not knowing. The seasons are a reminder that ordinary things, alleys, porches, fields of pumpkins, are not neutral backdrops. They can be the stage where a moment of strangeness changes how you move through the world. If you felt that chill reading these, if you have a story that began on a Halloween night and never quite let you go, share it in the comments. Tell us where you were and what you remember. Sometimes those threads knit together a map none of us could draw alone. And if you want more collections of true haunting encounters, subscribe and I'll bring you more stories. Because the strange things people remember don't stop in October. They keep unfolding in alleys, behind windows, and in the spaces we think we know. So I'll leave you with this. When the light slants low in October and the world looks like a place that could keep secrets, what do you take with you? A flashlight? A friend? A different way home? And what do you leave behind? What do the shadows keep?